For about 2 years, I ate almost the exact same breakfast every single morning. Oatmeal with blueberries, a glass of orange juice, and whole grain toast with a little jam. I genuinely believed I was crushing my diet. The scale barely moved, and I was starving again by 10 in the morning. So I finally started digging into the actual research, and what I found honestly annoyed me. Almost everything I'd been told about the perfect healthy breakfast was either oversold or flat out wrong. And some of it was old marketing that never caught up with the science. And some of it was health influencers scaring you about completely the wrong thing. So today I'll walk you through what actually wrecks your morning, why it matters so much when you're trying to lose weight, and the one simple swap that fixed my breakfast for good. Quick note up front, I'm not a doctor, just a guy who tests things on himself. So take this as personal experience mixed with digging through research, not medical advice. Let me start with why breakfast even deserves special attention here. When you eat carbs, your blood sugar rises, and that by itself is completely normal and healthy. The problem was never that glucose goes up at all. The problem is a sharp spike followed by a hard crash a couple of hours later. That crash is what drags you back to the fridge before lunch. Your energy dips and your cravings come roaring back. Then you eat more than you actually planned to. Research also suggests your insulin sensitivity tends to be lower first thing in the morning. In plain terms, the same bowl of carbs can spike you a bit harder at 7 a.m. than it would late at night. So if your first meal sets off that spike and crash, you're not just having one rough hour, you're often steering your appetite for the entire rest of the day. When I finally clipped on one of those continuous glucose monitors, I tested my old breakfast on myself. The juice and jam combo sent me straight up, and about 90 minutes later I felt foggy and hungry at 10 in the morning. Then I tried a higher protein version the next day. Roughly the same calories, and the line stayed way flatter. I wasn't clawing for a snack before lunch anymore. That's just me, one person, and I'll be honest about that the whole way through. But it lined up with the research closely enough that I kept pulling the thread. Now here's where it gets interesting, because this is exactly the story a lot of influencers love to tell. They take that spike and crash idea, and then they run way too far with it. Somebody sent me a clip a while back that is a perfect example of this. Even though I've been doing this for a couple of years now, this one still kind of stunned me. In the clip, a well-known doctor compares eggs to oatmeal, and he does not hold back at all. I won't name him, but you've probably seen him. He points to what he calls a profound study on overweight teenagers. The story goes like this. Researchers gave the kids 3 breakfasts with the exact same calories. So oatmeal, steel-cut oats, and an omelet. Then they locked them in a room and let them ask for more food whenever they got hungry. According to the clip, the oatmeal group had higher insulin, higher cortisol, and higher adrenaline. He literally says that eating oatmeal was like being chased by a tiger, and that your body cannot tell the difference. Then comes the big number. He claims the oatmeal kids ate 81% more food than the omelet group. He says the steel-cut oats were better, but those kids still ate 50% more than the omelet group. So his takeaway is simple and scary. Any starch or sugar in the morning is the worst thing you can do, and you should start your day with protein and fat instead. Okay, that sounds pretty alarming, right? So I did the boring thing that almost nobody does. I pulled up the actual study he was talking about and read the whole thing. It's a study published back in 1999, and it followed 12 obese teenage boys. The whole point was to compare meals with a different glycemic index. Glycemic index is just how much a meal spikes your blood sugar. They gave the boys a high, a medium, and a low glycemic index meal on 3 different days, then measured their blood and how much they ate afterward. So the obvious first question is, what were the actual meals? And the second I started reading the methods, something jumped straight off the page at me. The high glycemic meal was instant oats plus milk, cream, and dextrose. Dextrose is just a purified form of glucose, so they literally added sugar to the oatmeal side. They even treated the milk with an enzyme called lactase, which breaks the natural milk sugars into simpler ones. In other words, they engineered that meal to spike blood sugar as hard as possible. The medium meal was similar, but used steel-cut oats instead of instant, and fructose instead of glucose. So it was less processed, but they still added refined sugar to it. Then we get to the low glycemic meal, the one the clip proudly calls the omelet. It had 1 egg, some egg whites, a little low-fat cheese, and no added sugar at all. But here's the part the clip conveniently skips. That meal also had about half a kilo of fruits and vegetables piled on top of the eggs. We're talking 200 grams of spinach, some tomato, a chunk of grapefruit, and a serving of apple slices. The egg was actually less than 1/3 of the calories on that plate. So the so-called egg breakfast was mostly fruit and vegetables by volume and by calories. All that produce also made it much higher in fiber, and fiber drags the glycemic index down even further. And you know what's kind of funny here? The viewer who sent me the clip hadn't read the study, but he messaged me asking whether they'd secretly added sugar to the oats. He has no scientific training at all, and he still guessed one of the exact problems just from being around this stuff. So when people tell you the science is hopelessly confusing, honestly it can be pretty transparent when you actually open it. So now look at the results with that context in mind. Yes, blood sugar and insulin were higher after the higher glycemic meals, but that was true by design. Every single thing about that meal was built to spike glucose. They chose the added sugar, the lactase treatment, and the lower fiber precisely to push the number up. And by the way, glucose rising after a meal is completely normal physiology. After you eat carbs, there is more carb in your blood, and on its own, that is not harmful at all. Then there's the adrenaline, which is where the tiger line comes from. Adrenaline was highest on that high sugar instant oats meal, and honestly, that's a known thing in kids after a sugar hit. But here's a detail the clip skipped completely. Adrenaline was actually a bit higher on the egg and vegetable meal than on the steel-cut oats. And that tiger comparison really doesn't hold up. Researchers have measured adrenaline during things like bungee jumping, and it spikes 3 to 4 times higher than any meal in this study. So no, your body absolutely can tell the difference between a bowl of sugary oatmeal and an actual predator trying to eat you. That line sounds dramatic, but it just isn't real. Now for the main result, the part everyone quotes, which is how much the kids actually ate afterward. This is where the clip really falls apart. The kids did report feeling hungrier after both the medium and the high glycemic meals, but only the high glycemic meal actually led them to overeat afterward. That's the one with the instant oats, the dextrose, and the lactase-treated milk. Only that meal drove them to eat 81% more than the egg and vegetable breakfast. So the clip states that 81% number correctly. The problem is the very next claim, the one about 50% more on the steel-cut oats. That's just a misread of the study. The steel-cut oats group and the egg group actually ate about the same amount, with no meaningful difference between them. That 50% gap he mentions was really between the instant oats and the steel-cut oats, so it was high versus medium, not oats versus eggs, and it's spelled out right on the first page of the paper. So this quietly flips the whole conclusion. The clip makes it sound like carbs versus protein was the deciding factor, but that is not what the data shows at all. For appetite, the macros barely mattered here. The steel-cut oats and the eggs landed in basically the same place, even though their protein and carb numbers were very different. What actually drove the overeating was the heavily processed oats and the added refined sugar in that high glycemic meal. The authors even say the differences trace back to the glycemic index itself. So it was never really about whether you eat some oats in the morning. It was about how processed those carbs are and whether someone dumped refined sugar on top. Okay, so the obvious next question is, what happens if you compare eggs to oats fairly? No half kilo of vegetables on the eggs, and no refined sugar dumped on the oats. It turns out that's been tested more than once. One study ranked how satiating different foods were in the hours after eating them. Plain oatmeal made with rolled oats and low-fat milk scored around 209, and a higher score means more filling. Calorie-matched poached eggs came in around 150. Now, they didn't run a direct statistical test between those two, so I won't oversell it. Maybe they're roughly the same, but the oats clearly weren't the less filling option here. And this is an average across people, so your own body might behave differently. Some folks genuinely feel fuller on eggs, and some feel fuller on oats. There's one more wrinkle too. Almost every study we've looked at only tracks the hours right after a meal, which may not reflect what you do over weeks. There is one longer trial where people ate either eggs or oats every morning for 6 weeks. Their body weight and most blood markers came out about the same, with cholesterol actually running a little lower on the oats. So here's my honest takeaway from that whole saga. Both eggs and unprocessed oats can absolutely be part of a breakfast that helps you lose weight, and the influencer panic over plain oatmeal is mostly noise. So if plain oats aren't the villain, what actually is? This is where I want to point you at the real offenders, because they're hiding in plain sight every morning. The common thread is pretty simple. We're trying to cut the stuff that's tiny in volume but huge in calories, because that combination leaves you full of energy and still hungry. First up are the instant, sugar-loaded cereals and the single-serve flavored oat packets. These are the processed, sweetened version we saw wreck that study, and they're marketed straight at people trying to eat well. Next on my list is orange juice, and please don't throw your toast at me. Juice is a lot of calories in a small glass, and drinking your calories barely fills you up at all. When you juice an orange, you strip out most of the fiber that would have slowed everything down. So just eat the actual orange instead, because whole fruit keeps the fiber and keeps you fuller. Then there's the dessert coffee, which honestly might be the sneakiest one on this list. A big syrupy latte can hide 200 to 250 calories, and you don't feel full from a single sip. Drink that 4 times a day, and you've quietly added around 1,000 liquid calories you never even chewed. Plain coffee is genuinely fine, so it's really the syrup and cream turning it into cake. There's one more trap on the opposite end, the giant all-fat breakfast. Butter, then bacon, then sausage, then a pile of eggs fried in even more fat. Tastes amazing, but it's an enormous calorie load. If you genuinely love a fatty breakfast, then just pick one hero and build the plate around it. You honestly don't need butter and bacon and sausage all fighting for room at once. The fix here really isn't to be scared of fat, because fat by itself is not the enemy. Stacking butter and bacon and sausage and eggs together just turns one plate into a wall of calories. There are also people who simply feel sharper when they eat in the morning, and that is completely fine too. If you go shaky or foggy before lunch, then a real breakfast is a useful tool rather than some kind of failure. But skipping only works if you don't wildly overcorrect later on. If you get so ravenous by noon that you inhale everything in the kitchen, then that skipped breakfast never actually saved you anything. Skipping breakfast is really just a shorter eating window, and for some people that quietly trims their total calories for the day. If that genuinely fits how you feel, then it is a perfectly reasonable way to go. After testing both sides on myself for months, here's where I landed. If you are simply not hungry in the morning, then forcing food down just to tick a box does very little for you. You've probably heard that skipping breakfast wrecks your metabolism, or that it's the single most important meal of the day. A lot of that started as old marketing that never really caught up with the science. Now let me deal with the question I get literally every single time this topic comes up. Do you even need to eat breakfast at all? Short answer, no. Breakfast isn't mandatory on its own. Neither fasting until lunch nor a habitual bowl of oatmeal at 7 a.m. settles the weight loss question by itself. What settles it is what your whole day adds up to, and whether it pushes you into overeating later. So let me show you where I actually landed after all this testing. I'm not going to hand you a rigid meal plan, because the whole point is that you get the mental model instead. The difference is that I use the big, slow-cooking rolled or steel-cut oats now. I add whole fruit for sweetness instead of sugar, and I pair it with some protein so the whole thing actually holds me. And here's the part that surprised me the most after all this. I still eat oatmeal, because plain oats were never the problem I thought they were. When I want something more filling, I'll build it out into a shakshuka with a real spice mix. There's protein and fat from the eggs, plus fiber and volume from all those tomatoes and greens. On most mornings, that looks like eggs cooked with a big pile of vegetables, so plenty of tomato and spinach in the pan. It's basically the winning meal from that study, just without a food label slapped on it. The simple frame I keep in my head is a balanced plate. I want some protein, some fat, some fiber, and slower carbs sharing the plate instead of fast carbs running the whole show. Try it for 1 week, and pay attention to how you feel around 11 in the morning. If that morning crash finally goes quiet, then you'll know the swap is doing its job. You don't have to buy a plan or choke down food you hate at 7 a.m. You just stop letting a tiny, sugary, liquid breakfast quietly run your appetite for the whole rest of the day. Swap the juice for whole fruit and swap the syrupy coffee for plain coffee. Then add some protein to whatever carb you already love, whether that's eggs beside your oats or a bit of yogurt on the side. If you only take one thing from all of this, then make it this single swap tomorrow morning. Stop drinking your breakfast and start chewing it instead. That's the whole video, so thanks for sticking with me all the way to the end. Drop your usual breakfast in the comments, because I'm genuinely curious what everyone's eating. I'll catch you in the next one.